From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Issue 1, Restless Republicans. The 114th Congress commences in early January. Republican leaders say they'll pursue a bold governing agenda, but at the same time, compromise with the president. Ruling out new government shutdown sagas, they know that to defeat Hillary Clinton in 2016, the GOP nominee will need the independent vote, which, according to Gallup, now constitutes 42% of the electorate. Yet not all Republicans are so ready to compromise. Looking to 2016 themselves, Republican Senators Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, and Marco Rubio are looking to burnish their credentials with conservative activists rather than independents. Here's what the younger Mr. Paul recently told HBO host Bill Maher.
But why I've decided now we have to do something is I think that ISIS is now a threat to our embassy and to our consulate, and I think we do need to defend American interests, and there are lines that occasionally have to be drawn.
It's not just Rand Paul. Ted Cruz is ramping up his fiery conservative rhetoric. On November 10th, he tweeted that, quote, net neutrality is Obamacare for the internet, unquote, meaning that it is fundamentally defective. In another press release, Mr. Cruz stated that executive amnesty by President Obama to illegal immigrants currently residing in the United States would, quote, create a constitutional crisis that demands action by Congress to restore the separation of powers, unquote. And then there's Marco Rubio, already popular with conservative donors. In January, Senator Rubio will release a book with a title straight out of a presidential campaign factory, American Dreams, Restoring Economic Opportunity for Everyone. Question, will House Speaker Boehner and Majority Leader McConnell be able to control these presidential wannabes? Pat Buchanan.
You listed 3 wannabes. All 3 of them are in the United States Senate. John, the race for the Republican nomination, nobody's got more than 15%. And if you want to get the nomination, you don't worry about independents in a general election. You excite the base, the Tea Party, the conservatives, the activists, the libertarians. And this is exactly what Cruz is doing. And I think it's a correct strategy as a nomination strategy. It's risky in a general election. But this race is so wide open, John, that the guy that's going to do well, the individual, I think he's got to show some real passion and fire and energy and ability to communicate. And there's no doubt I would put Cruz in the top level there, and the second one I would put behind him for that, rolling that route, is Rand Paul. One of those 2, I think, is going to get to the finals.
Okay, the others. Storming into the Senate, freshman Republican senators like Tom Cotton of Arkansas and Joni Ernst of Iowa are dark horse candidates for 2016. Included with them are those outside Congress, in what's sure to be a crowded field. Other potential 2016 presidential candidates include John Bolton, Jeb Bush, Ben Carson, Chris Christie, Carly Fiorina, Lindsey Graham, Mike Huckabee, Bobby Jindal, John Kasich, Mike Pence, Rick Perry, Rob Portman, Mitt Romney, Paul Ryan, Rick Santorum, John Thune, Scott Walker. Question, is there a front runner? Ella?
Well, you started off with Tom Cotton. I'd look at him for 2020. He's got a lot of good credentials, you know, Harvard, Iraq veteran, but he's just won an election, and it's his first term in the U.S. Senate. And Joni Ernst, let's see how she develops. They're not going to run in 2016. But all that other crew, everybody's dreaming of the White House. And I think if you look at the trio that's running from the Senate, Cruz, Rubio, and Rand Paul, they're all going to use the Senate floor to advance their candidacies. And I think Ted Cruz is probably going to go over to the House and do some freelancing among conservatives. I think Cruz thinks he can harness the anti-Washington sentiment in the country. He is the most disliked member of the U.S. Senate by his colleagues, by both Democrats and Republicans. Rand Paul is a serious legislator, and I think he does have the potential of knitting together the different wings of the Republican Party. And Marco Rubio, I don't think will run if Jeb Bush runs. He's his protege, and if Jeb Bush is making noises that he's going to get in, and he would be a serious contender.
How old is Cotton?
Oh,
Tell me
late
more
30s,
about
early
him.
40s.
Huh?
Late 30s, early 40s. I don't know his exact
He's not
age.
gonna
He's a
run in
young man.
2016,
He's not going to
John.
run in
He
2016.
just got in there. It's 2 years.
That's right.
He got 2 years. He's not even been in the Senate a day yet.
That's right.
But Barack Obama,
Well, Barack Obama had been in the Senate 2 years.
that's
but that field is saturated with a huge amount, different candidates. I think it's going to be interesting to see how Rand Paul tries to put himself more in the establishment to win over, more foreign policy realists, which he's doing, as in the segment. Ted Cruz obviously trying to galvanize the conservative base. He's certainly not going to be able to be controlled by the Senate and House leadership. And then, I think when you look at Marco Rubio, there's a more quiet, since his immigration reform efforts failed, under the surface trying to build relationships. And then there's, a vast other field as well. So, I mean, it's going to be an interesting race, but it's something we're going to have to probably talk about again.
No clear front runner?
No clear front runner. And Susana Martinez as well. It's interesting. I think New Mexico, she may be in the running. So.
In the latest Washington Post GOP 2016 poll done in October, put Rand Paul at 13%, Jeb Bush at 12%, which I don't think has been reflected in the conversation on this panel.
No,
that he's stronger than people think. And Mike Huckabee at 12%. No other contender top single digits. Does any of that surprise you?
Well, if there's any surprise for me, it is that Mr. Bush, Governor Bush, is only at 12%. It seems to me he, in terms of the opportunity to win the election of presidency, is the strongest candidate that the Republicans have. And I think he will show that over the next year or so. I'm convinced.
He's out of step with the modern Republican Party.
He could be the
Yes, I'm sure
establishment
he is,
candidate.
but he will.
Too many people talking. Go ahead.
Right, listen, Jeb Bush could well be the establishment entry in the finals. He could well be. It's
Jeb Bush?
him or Romney or Christie. But you've got a name you just dropped out there that's important, John, and that's Mike Huckabee. Now, the social conservatives were ignored in the last election. They're enormously large in Iowa. He's very strong. I think the Jewish vote is going to move, and money is going to move toward the Republicans because of the Israeli situation. Huckabee is very strong with these folks, very strong with the evangelicals, and he's a conservative.
Is Huckabee wrestling with the decision?
I think he's looking toward it.
Yeah.
You've seen groups get together.
Have you seen him speak to the subject?
Well, he just took a trip over to Poland and one other. What's it? The three trips, the three eyes.
You mean like Romney did?
Ireland, Italy, and Israel. That's what they used to do. But
he's wrestling with it enough to get attention to his radio show, television show, and he may do well in Iowa. But I would be willing to bet Pat money that Mike Huckabee will not be the Republican nominee unless the party has totally lost their mind.
But I think somebody's going to come out of that group. Huckabee, Rand Paul, and Cruz. I think that's the populist side. Somebody there is going to be in the finals against the establishment.
Why is there no mention here of...
I have to totally disagree with you. The Republican Party cannot live and be in the outside the White House again for another 8 years, which is what you have to assume if it's another Democrat who comes in. They've been out of power, so to speak, for quite a long time. And if they put up a very extreme conservative, or a very strong conservative.
Have you ever been to Iowa or South Carolina?
I have been, actually, and I left very quickly.
What is the early primary state?
It's Iowa caucuses, New Hampshire primary.
Who's the head of New Hampshire?
I think Christie would do well in New Hampshire. His personality fits them very nicely.
Jeb Bush, 15%, Christie 12%.
Well, that's what I'm telling you.
Christie 12%.
Well,
did you know that?
I'm telling you, John, when I went into New Hampshire, Dole was over 50. Nobody's got more than 15%.
I know, and that produced almost nervous tremors throughout the population.
Well, for the Republican...
It was totally unpredictable the way he slashed Dole.
Well, for the Republican Party,
in his ridiculous. I take that back, Pat. I'm not characterizing your run as ridiculous.
Well,
Okay.
They're going to start ripping each other to shreds.
Well,
don't they?
And it's audacious. Audacious. How's that?
Bob Dole eventually got the nomination in '96. Let's
He's
remember
an
that.
establishment candidate, so they won.
Okay.
New Hampshire's not everything.
Enough of this. We're going to return to Earth with this. Issue 2, wildlife woe. This Thanksgiving, you were probably glad that you weren't the turkey. Well, be glad, too, that you aren't a lion or a tiger or a polar bear. That's because around the globe, animal populations of practically all kinds are in decline. So says the latest Living Planet report from the World Wildlife Fund that examined trends in more than 10,000 populations of more than 3,000 animal species. Get this. Between 1970 and 2010, a span of 40 years, the world populations of mammals, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and fish fell by 52%. That means that only 40 years ago, the sheer number of mammals, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and fish was double what it is now. So says the report. Freshwater species have been hit the hardest, a 76% decline. Marine species like sea turtles, sharks, and migratory seabirds have declined 39%. Land mammals also declined by 39%. And while animal populations are declining in both temperate and tropical regions, the biggest decline is in the tropics. Latin America registered an 83% decline in species. So guess what species is not in decline at all and is the culprit behind the decline of practically all wildlife? Man. Exploitation of wildlife by mankind is the #1 threat to wildlife populations. Exploitation through hunting and overfishing, harvesting fish faster than the oceans can replenish them. The next biggest threat to wildlife after exploitation, habitat degradation. Man encroaching on nature by building more, by farming more, by exploiting more.
Our footprint on the planet is increasing, continues to rise. That means that we are cutting trees faster than they can regrow. We are catching fish faster than they can reproduce. We are emitting more CO2 than oceans and forests can absorb.
In brief, the report says that humanity's demand on planet Earth is more than Earth has. Question. In view of this catastrophic situation, what about going vegan? Would that reduce the strain on wildlife population? I ask you, Tom.
Yeah, I don't think the issue is about going vegan. I think the issue, though, is having a broader cognizance across the country, both Democrat, Republican, Independent, that there are real issues beyond global warming. And the environment doesn't end there. So from my perspective, my brother and my uncle work for a group called Ocean Alliance that does a lot of stuff, especially on the oceans. And one of the things they're always telling me is it's not just about whales and dolphins and sharks. It's about the food chain. If you are putting mercury into the oceans, it's passing up through the fish into mammals, and then it's things that we're consuming. So there are real tangible things. The declining figures we're looking at are huge. But in the public domain, this sort of fetish for that it's all global warming, it all ends there, I think it's profoundly counterproductive. So I think what we need is more of a public dialogue to say, look at these issues, and look, that doesn't have to be partisan. That is a clear issue when you see statistical degradation.
Well, I think you're knocking or underrating vegan. You know, are you vegan?
I am a vegan, yes, and I'm absolutely. I'm in a national movement to save animals just by becoming a vegan.
Wonderful.
Well,
I've been a vegan for 6 years now, and I recommend it.
What has it done, do you think, to your interest or your personality?
Well, it's made me once more into the most dynamic carrot you've ever encountered in your life. No, I lost 40 pounds in the process, frankly, and I feel terrific.
But you know, if
I'll tell you who's really happy. My tailor is really happy.
Well, Diet for a Small Planet was published, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago. So there are benefits if we lessened our reliance on meat. But reading the report that's put out by the World Wildlife Fund makes you cry. I mean, there are more elephants that are poached than are born. You have to create sanctuaries for orphaned elephants. You have overfishing. There's government regulation that can come into play here, and there are lots of good people around the world working on these issues.
This report is non-scientific at all. It's signed by all the, backed by all the members. This is a propaganda piece.
No.
They don't know if there's
Okay.
50. There's no doubt there's a problem.
All right.
Look what's happening in Brazil. They're cutting down the rainforest and all that.
Yes,
but this
that's a
thing is
problem.
propaganda.
Okay, thanks for putting us onto that.
Yeah.
We're going to ruminate on that.
Right, right. We're
You've
gonna
given out the alert.
put that in
Issue
the
3,
trash can
so
where it
long,
belongs.
teacher. It's a brave new world. Digital learning, the use of computer technology platforms for education, is rapidly changing the way Americans are taught. In schools and colleges across the nation, the blackboard is giving way to the tablet. Is it new? Here's what digital learning advocate Mimi Ito said 4 years ago.
I think that there are incredibly important functions for schools. What we're saying by valuing informal learning is not that we should abandon formal learning, but that we should get those working together in a much more coordinated way.
Today, 4 years later, the computer-led informality transformation of education has taken hold. These middle school students type out answers to a question on touch screens. Teacher Kate Lewis instantly knows if her students understand the material.
I could deal with the problem a lot faster than before, and it also allows me to change my instruction based on the student's needs.
Teacher Lewis says digital platforms like the ones her students use saves valuable classroom time. Question: does the digital learning revolution risk developing a generation of digitally adept but socially inept drones? Tom Rogan.
I think there are risks if there is an over-reliance on technology. I think the key, though, is that you have education reform that allows you to have the best teachers rising to the top, the worst teachers being removed from the system, forcibly if necessary, but at the same time fostering a intellectual curiosity on the part of students that whatever their individual stress, they can go. And I would just one final example. One thing that troubles me in the United States versus the UK is that when you go to college here, you have to take things like maths and physics, whatever, that, regardless of your major. In the United Kingdom, when you go to college, you focus on this particular area that you're interested in. And that happens actually when you're about 16, so it stimulates early personal interest.
Ellen, I went into a classroom recently, and there were about 50 students there, and the teacher was in the back of the room. He was seated, and all of the students were looking at their television, not the television, their
iPad.
Their
This
tablets,
is called
their screen.
blended-
Well, they had actually screens on the desk.
Okay.
And I said to the teacher, how long is this going on? She said, oh, they can stay there for the whole period, and then we might have a couple of minutes discussion at the end. Well, what is that?
Right.
What has happened to the teacher?
The
teacher is the one who inspires people to learn.
The teacher is still involved. This is called blended learning, and it's a combination of technology because we live in a technological world, and it's an effort to get technology to everybody, not just the people who can afford it.
Absolutely.
And
You think
in
you're
Florida,
whitewashing?
excuse me, in Florida, Jeb Bush created a digital learning council. This is one of his big issues. And in Florida, you don't graduate high school unless you pass one course that's online. So you know how to operate online. This is not taking over. This is teaching people to live in the world as it is. And it's sharing the goodies of technology with everybody across the digital divide. This is a good thing.
In my judgment, it's going to dramatically expand the capacity to teach both people in elementary school and especially in high school, because you will have the material presented in the most appealing way. And I've seen this, in a number of private schools where they do this. It's a huge plus in terms of the way people learn and in terms of the way teaching is done.
Who's making a buck?
I don't know who's making a buck. I'll tell you who is getting a lot more out of their high school education than they ever did.
What do the teachers say about it in their General Assembly?
They love it.
Union.
They love it.
They love it?
Absolutely.
Why? Because they can offload work?
No, it's not because they know they're getting a better. They're
John,
doing a better job.
You mean a better teaching job?
Yes.
With all this apparatus?
Yeah, it's much better. This is extremely well organized and well thought out presentation online.
If I asked you who had the principal influence on you, who taught you, would you think of a machine or would you think of a human being?
No, of course, because I never had machines, if I may say so.
But if you had machines, it would have been machines, right?
Well, I don't know. I think I bet you for some of the courses it would have been dramatically better on machines.
Don't you think that the teacher is there to evolve to evolve. I'll throw this at you.
It doesn't
to
take away
evolve
from the
emotion and
John,
love of learning.
Let me agree with you. I think the machines replace in many cases books. We've learned enormous amounts out of books, what you read, studied, but I agree with you about the teacher. But the machines, there's no doubt they're an asset and an advantage. Mainly beneficial, though, to folks that know how to use them and handle them. So the meritocracy, those folks, it's going to increase the divide between folks that don't use them and folks that do.
You have 5 seconds.
Yeah, you must be able to foster social skills because people will never be able to enter the workforce, learn, build social relations. Not just about business, social relations. That is critical. So we cannot have the drone situation.
Issue 4. Thanks, but no thanks. It's a time of war and of terrorism, suicide bombings, vicious beheadings, bloody civil wars, global alliances gone cold, deadly epidemics, rising cybercrime, mass shootings, chronic underemployment, surging deficits, mounting personal debt, stagnant wages, a shrinking middle class, long, scorching summers, and frigid, endless winters. Question, with all of this misery, what can possibly be left for Americans to be thankful for? I ask you...
Tom Rogan.
Tom.
An American citizen. I think actually that's my point. And someone who grew up abroad, and I mean this genuinely, it's not, it sounds cheesy, maybe it is, but it's true. The United States is still the best place in the world to live with the most opportunities. We need much more of an opportunity culture, and we know that based on income inequality. But at the same time, in terms of opportunities to pursue your own interests, the benefit of a free society, a free press, open, tolerant society where everyone comes together, I know this Thanksgiving, I'm very happy to be here, and I'm happy to be a citizen. John, and it's a great and special place to be.
Amen to that, John. Let me say, from the day I was born, John, 1938 till 1950, 12 years, 100 million people were killed in World War II, all the way from France, all the way to Russia. Then 1 billion people went behind the Iron Curtain under Stalin and under China, under Mao Zedong. Millions and millions perished. Now we got a lot of problems going on, but none of them horrors of that magnitude. We left the bloodiest century in all of history, the 20th century. A lot of problems now, but I must say, if you take the freedom of all those people in China and Eastern Europe and everywhere, even decolonialism in Asia, prosperity, on balance, it's a far better world.
Mort, China's economy has gone flat. Is that something that we should be thankful for on this Thanksgiving?
Not really. First of all, if I may say, I call it thank you giving, because as a immigrant to this country, it's been an absolutely wonderful experience for me.
You miss Canada?
I don't miss Canada, I have to say, but
did you come across the Rio Grande too?
You know
that would have taken a real trip out there.
You know, and this provides me with an opportunity to salute the Canadians who watch this show. We have a very substantial audience all over Canada.
I get contacts from them on a huge number. On huge
I think
numbers.
Even the President of Canada watches this show.
Well, there's a problem here. We don't have a president.
Prime Minister?
We have a prime minister.
He watches the show.
I would hope so.
He's a friend of yours.
Well, as it happens, he is a friend of mine.
Did he not tell you he watched it on TV?
He not only did not tell me, he hasn't given me the slightest hint that he watches the show.
He is not? No. Mort, I've met the man.
Well,
how can that be?
You're upset, John, on Thanksgiving.
John, you're witnessing a fit of self-control
you can be thankful for that, John. You can be thankful you met the Prime Minister of Canada. There you go.
If I could interrupt this little Canadian Maple Leaf tete-a-tete, I just wanted to add, I think we all ought to be grateful that we're still here debating issues after, what, some 30 years, John?
37.
And we haven't solved a whole lot of them.
And I'm very honored that all of you have been so kind to me having me on the show.
You have no reason to boast. You slipped out of here for 4 or 5 years. You worked for Reagan.
Four leaves of absence only, John. Just
4 leaves of absence?
Yeah. 3 presidential runs in Reagan.
What's in that time when you were able to boost your intelligence here on the show?
I think I'm probably about 24 years out of the 32.
Well, the Republican field is wide open, Pat. Still time to get in.
What were you going to say?
As someone who grew up in London, England, watching on CNBC with my father, it's great to be on the set with John McLaughlin on this Thanksgiving. So that's a nice little...
Well, let's hope the CNBC has the wisdom to have carried us. Is there anything else to be left on this before we let it go?
Well,
this is dying right before our eyes.
Why don't you tell us what you're thankful for?
This is the most upwardly mobile society ever, okay? And those of us who are immigrants really appreciate that. And it's the most open society. People are just very friendly, very courteous, warm. They're open to talent. They're open to friendship. It doesn't get any better.
Predictions, Pat?
The Congress of the United States, Republicans and Democrats alike, we're going to go after any kind of Iranian deal that comes down. They're going to try to impose sanctions on Iran, whether they get a deal or they don't get a deal, or whether they extend the current negotiations.
Elena?
Well, the Republicans have been yelling and screaming about how President Obama has exceeded his authority and he's acting like a king. But when the new Congress comes in January, they will give this president fast-track authority to conclude a huge trade deal that he can negotiate on his own without having going back to Congress, because the Republicans want that. They're willing to let the king have his way.
Yeah. Republicans, of course, as usual, Elena, are the devils in our midst. What do you want to tell
On
me?
that positive note, I think in the coming weeks, people should expect greatly increased tensions between China and India and Pakistan in the border regions.
Well, I'll learn. What?
The continued erosion of wages in America amongst American working families, okay, is going to be a huge issue going forward, and it's going to force the government to do something to try and stimulate the economy, because the number of people whose wages are going down is just extraordinary. While it's not for the top level, but for the...
How did amnesty for illegals help that?
I predict, despite the tragic setback in the Mojave Desert, Richard Branson will persevere in his quest to make outer space accessible to tourism, although on a timetable that is somewhat lengthier than he hoped. And notice we said accessible, not affordable. As for the fee, you got that, Pat? Happy Thanksgiving weekend.
Costs, right.
Bye-bye.
Looking for these? You drive buzzed. It could be one very expensive ride.
First, you gotta make bail. Then pay me to get your car back.
Your insurance premiums will go through the roof.
And my legal fees just keep adding up. All told, it could end up costing you $10,000.
Buzzed, busted, and broke. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.